This escalation very much has the ability to draw the United States in, which is not something President Biden wants, as well as destabilizing the region further. And we've seen that the Jordanians closed their airspace, the Lebanese closed their airspace. Of course, Israel did as well. The economic impacts of all of this are going to be felt by all the countries in the region, and indeed even more widely.
39. Diplomatic sources have told The Times that Iran says it will de-escalate after the assault on Israel. But the question now being asked is, how does Israel respond, and what does it mean for security in the region? Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley is president of the Middle East Policy Council.
What it means is that we have gone to an unprecedented exchange. There has been, in the shadows, a proxy war going on between Iran and Israel for some time. The attacks via Hezbollah, the attacks, obviously the one that the Israelis carried out in Syria, for which they did not claim responsibility. Let's keep that in mind. But everyone understands what's going on. This direct response from Iran to that attack is unprecedented, quite frankly. So it has taken it to a new level, one that puts the region on the precipice of disaster. It's hard to use another word for this.
In this context, then, is it fair to say, as we are waking up in the UK this morning, that the next move is for Netanyahu?
There are a few things that should be watched in the next several days. Iran gave an overwhelming response, over 200 rockets, drones, ballistic missiles. So there was no hesitation. They didn't make it small. They wanted to send a strong signal that what was done in Syria is unacceptable. To hit a diplomatic facility and to kill senior Iranian officials had to be responded to in an overwhelming way. So that was done. But the reality is that the damage done to Israel has been minimal so far as casualties are concerned, as far as physical damage. And so this, I believe, was a very careful decision by the Iranians to satisfy their domestic audience, to send a strong message to Israel, but not to require yet another escalation in the response. I believe that the Israelis are hearing strongly from the United States that they must be very careful in how they respond to this. We have to keep in mind that the Israelis did not tell the United States before they carried out the strike in Syria, and they did not have the United States green light or agreement to carry out that strike in Syria. This escalation very much has the ability to draw the United States in, which is not something President Biden wants, as well as destabilizing the region further. And we've seen that the Jordanians closed their airspace, the Lebanese closed their airspace. Of course, Israel did as well. The economic impacts of all of this are going to be felt by all the countries in the region, and indeed even more widely.
There's a couple of things I'd like to pick up on from what you've just said. First of all, about drawing America in. A couple of things on that. President Biden says American support for Israel is ironclad, but he also says the US helped take down nearly all of the incoming drones and missiles. Hasn't the US already been drawn in?
To an extent, absolutely. And that is something that is going to be part of a tough conversation between the United States and Israel. It is not what the United States wants, and it is something that the United States and Iran have worked very hard to avoid, starting from the beginning of this conflict, October 7th. Now, there have been, along with the UK, sending rocket responses to the Houthis because of their attacking shipping in the Red Sea. So the United States has been drawn in to a degree, but this is a larger degree. And there was a requirement from President Biden that we would stand with Israel and indeed help defend Israel from Iran's attack.
To what extent, then, Gina, is this retaliation by Iran, without wishing to trivialize it, because clearly it is of the gravest nature, but to what extent is it performative? Is it so that Iran can demonstrate something with really minimal damage and casualties on the ground, and so that could, in theory, be it?
It could, in theory, be it. The world will be lucky if it is it. But it depends really on the government of Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he has gotten a few things out of this. Again, remembering that the United States did not agree to the strike in Syria. So there are three things among many. I think there are actually more than three things, but keeping in mind in the last several days, the world's attention has been on the strike against Iran and how will Iran respond. So right now, nobody is talking about what's going on in the Gaza Strip. The pressure to increase humanitarian assistance, to find that ceasefire has been lifted, momentarily perhaps, but certainly has been lifted as the focus has shifted. The prime minister has eased a weapon his political opponents had, which is that his actions have endangered the bilateral relationship with the United States. Well, this strike on Iran and anticipating the response brought the United States president fully into the embrace of Israel once again, even under Prime Minister Netanyahu's leadership. And finally, it likely has unified Israelis again in fear of this attack, having to protect the nation, drawing together as a nation under siege, and that was something that was hampered as well.
It's a fascinating consideration, actually, those 3 points, and what Netanyahu kind of gains from this sort of attack. I suppose then, Gina, the question that we are all wrestling with this morning is what happens next. And you've highlighted a few things to consider and to look out for in the coming days. Could this lead to a de-escalation across the region, or do you think it is more likely that the only route is now escalation across the region?
I hope for de-escalation. It is not my expectation. I will be surprised, even though there's going to be a great deal of pressure on Israel to either not respond or to respond minimally. But the calculations that the United States is making, as well as the calculations that Iran is making, and that mutual desire not to see it escalate, is not necessarily the calculation of the Israeli prime minister. And that is who we're going to have to watch.
That's Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, former US ambassador, also president of the Middle East Policy Council, who I think it's fair to say remains uncertain about what the next few days hold and whether President Biden can exert enough influence on Netanyahu to kind of show restraint. Is that the appropriate response as far as you're concerned? A couple of your texts on this quite interesting. Anthony, first of all, 300 drones and 30 cruise missiles to cause minimal damage, followed by, what's that, 7 question marks. I think that is an interesting consideration this morning in terms of the drones being shot down, the missiles being shot down, and yeah, the kind of reporting is minimal damage around kind of military targets. And one analysis is that was that part of Iran's calculations. And as we were discussing with Gina there, is this something of a performative retaliation so that Iran can say, we've retaliated to the people of Iran, but actually the escalation doesn't go any further
Well,
than
it depends,
this.
depends what Israel does.
Exactly, and that's the unknown. So that could have been Iran's thinking. So the 7 question marks, Anthony, I think are justified on that front. But then it's a question as to whether Netanyahu sees it as, this is it, let's draw a line.